For our webinar, we are presenting the GIS tool Firebird. The tool is used to apply wildlife habitat suitability models for informing forest management, with an emphasis on post-fire salvage logging. First, I'm going to provide background information and justification for the GIS tool, followed by Jon Dudley, who will demonstrate how to use the tool. And lastly, I will present model interpretation for designing post-fire salvage logging. The manual for this tool was published in 2019 as a general technical report by the Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station. The tool is fully documented in this general technical report with step-by-step operating instructions, including guidelines for interpretation. Additionally, we produced a Vimeo or video tutorial of step-by-step instructions for tool application. With increases in wildfires, there have been many more opportunities for post-fire salvage logging. And removal of affected trees through salvage logging can be of economic value to local communities, in addition to reducing snag hazards to humans. However, removal of snags following fires has negative ecological consequences, including reduction of habitat for disturbance-associated wildlife, particularly several focal woodpecker species. Forest managers are challenged with implementing post-fire salvage projects while concurrently meeting the requirements of existing laws and planning documents to maintain wildlife habitat. Litigation, including uncertainty over effects of management to woodpecker species, has impeded implementation of salvage logging and dry forest management on several national forests. The tool is intended to inform post-fire, post-beetle outbreak, and dry forest management planning that will minimize negative consequences to woodpecker species and help in meeting habitat conservation objectives. The overall goal of Firebird is to map habitat for species of conservation concern for the required environmental analyses of land management activities. To map nesting habitat suitability, we've been collecting data to inform habitat models since 1994 in several Western states, including Idaho, Oregon, Washington, Montana, and most recently in California, with a focus on these 4 woodpecker species. We began studying wildfires and their relationships with birds in 1994 on the Boise National Forest, when fires were becoming larger and more frequent. Since then, we have been conducting studies of woodpecker nesting ecology in relation to large-scale disturbances of wildfires, bark beetle outbreaks, and land management activities on multiple national forests in the western U.S. We chose woodpeckers because several species are strongly associated with recently disturbed forests. The habitat suitability models are based on multi-spatial scale habitat relationships and nest locations across these study areas. The GIS tool is applicable or most applicable to nearby locations with similar forest characteristics where the models were developed. The tool operates in ArcGIS and uses widely available remotely sensed data to generate single species habitat suitability index maps. Tool development incorporated feedback from biologists at the district, forest, and regional levels. Burn severity, pre-fire canopy cover, and topography are all examples of spatial data that provide continuous cover across landscapes. Habitat variables such as tree density and diameter are also very important features to nest site selection. However, these variables predominantly require field data collection. This limited our ability to incorporate such variables into models applicable across broad landscapes. For this reason, we started using remotely sensed variables as an index to these field collected habitat features. In the future, we plan to incorporate these finer scale features into the models using LiDAR. You can access the tool software and download all supporting documentation on the RMRS Tools website. And now Jon Dudley will demonstrate using the tool.
Thanks, Vicki. As Vicki mentioned, the tools are most applicable to the regions where they were developed. We have multiple regions and species included in the toolbox. For the interior Northwest region, we currently have tools for blackback, Lewis's, and white-headed woodpeckers, and for the northern Sierra region, blackback, hairy, and white-headed woodpeckers. Within the GTR, there are 5 sections that correspond to species-specific models in either burned or unburned forest habitats. The species are listed here by the section you'd find them in the GTR. Note that section 4.5 for the Lewis's woodpecker burn forest model is available via an addendum posted on the Firebird Tool website. That takes us to today's example, where we'll focus on the Lewis's woodpecker model for recently burned forests. You don't need extensive GIS experience to use Firebird. You do need access to ArcGIS either as desktop software installed on your PC or accessed via the Forest Service Citrix environment. If you have access to the Forest Service network, you can find the toolbox via the T-Drive path listed here. If you don't have access to the Forest Service network, you'll need to download the toolbox directly from the Firebird Tool website. Note that the current version is 2.1, which expands the models available for Lewis's woodpeckers. The GTR provides detailed descriptions and step-by-step instructions for using the tool from start to finish. In order to execute the tool, you will need certain spatial data. Depending on the model, you will need at least 3 of the following spatial data layers. You'll need a boundary polygon, which for unburned models is the project area, and for burn models is the fire perimeter. You'll also need a % canopy cover raster, which for unburned models is current canopy cover, and for burn models is pre-fire canopy cover. And then below the broken line, there are some model-specific data requirements, and you'll need at least one of these depending on the species and particular model of interest. That may include a burn severity raster, ponderosa pine cover raster, or California-specific habitat polygons. And there are detailed instructions for gathering all the spatial data you might need for a particular model in the GTR. For today's example, using the Lewis's woodpecker burn model, we'll need 3 spatial data layers: the fire perimeter, % pre-fire canopy cover, and burn severity in the form of delta normalized burn ratio. I want to take a brief moment to explain that you have 2 potential sources for burn severity for most of the species represented in the toolset. Which source you use depends on the timeline related to your analysis. For example, if you need to make short time frame decisions related to NEPA within 1 year after wildfire, you would use Rapid Assessment of Vegetation Condition After Wildfire, also known as Ravage data, as your source for burn severity. However, if your time frame is longer, for example, 1 to 2 years after wildfire, then you would use Monitoring Trends in Burn Severity, or MTBS data, as your source for burn severity. This leads us to step 1 of the toolbox, which is input development. In this step, we'll use the raw spatial data layers to generate the inputs needed for running the models. Everything you need is here in the input development section. You won't need to look to other ARC tools in order to generate the habitat suitability maps. We've also included application masks to ensure that tools are applied within habitats similar to where models were developed. Today we'll be looking at generate inputs for the Lewis's woodpecker burn model. When you select it, a new window will open. Here you will input the fire perimeter, burn severity, and % pre-fire canopy cover layers, which I will point out that canopy cover is provided for those with access to the Forest Service T drive. With execution of this step, we will have developed the necessary inputs for the Lewis's woodpecker burned HSI model. This includes local burn severity, % landscape burn severity, % landscape open canopy cover, and % landscape low canopy cover. These are all important variables for predicting Lewis's woodpecker nest sites, and we will use them in the next step. Step 2 is model execution. Here is where we will take the results from the previous step and input them into the HSI model for the woodpecker species of interest. For today's example, that's the Lewis's woodpecker burn model, which uses MTBS-derived burn severity. So we'll input local burn severity, % landscape burn severity, % landscape open canopy cover, and % landscape low canopy cover. And after executing the model, we'll output a 30-meter resolution raster layer with values that reflect the relative likelihood for Lewis's woodpecker nest occurrence. That is, we now have a map of habitat suitability indices, or HSIs, with potential values ranging from 0, which is low suitability, to 1, which is high suitability. We also anticipate that managers might want distinct categories rather than a continuous range of HSI values. So within the GTR, we provide guidance and thresholds for classifying suitability into categories of low, moderate, and high, shown here as green, yellow, and red, respectively. These category thresholds are based on natural breaks in observed nest densities across the HSI gradient, shown here in the plot as solid black dots. The open dots and whiskers are nest density estimates bootstrapped by HSI category. As you can see, nest densities predictively increase with increases in habitat suitability in a way that can inform model application. That takes us to step 4, model application. Because of that relationship between nest density and relative suitability, you can identify areas that are most suited for nesting. For example, within mapped low suitability habitat, management actions could emphasize salvage logging for economic benefit, with lessened impact on population persistence. Whereas within mapped moderate suitability habitat, management actions could selectively log to favor species-specific habitat conditions. While within mapped high suitability habitat, management actions could maximize habitat conservation, for example through reserve design, to improve the likelihood of population persistence. Following these practices, Firebird is already in use for forest management planning and post-fire salvage logging purposes. Now Vicki will provide some examples on how Firebird is being used.
Thanks, John. Versions of Firebird over the last 10 years have been applied and used across multiple regions to inform not only salvage logging, but also to quantify habitat for multiple woodpecker species in both burned and unburned forests. For example, the northern region in 2017 during post-fire planning used our Firebird models to quantify woodpecker habitat for nearly 1 million acres. The model generated HSI maps, or habitat suitability maps, have been used to inform locations and treatments, while field collected data from our related publications have been used to guide silvicultural prescriptions. One good example is from the Canyon Creek complex fire in 2015 on the Malheur National Forest in Oregon. In the future, we hope to incorporate our habitat models developed for beetle-killed forests into Firebird Toolbox that will help inform salvage logging after beetle outbreaks. In conclusion, Firebird is easy to use. It generates habitat suitability indices, raster maps that can be queried and used in conjunction with other forest and species conservation planning tools. It's useful for NEPA and provides the starting blocks for forest planning. This work was made possible by strong collaborations between researchers and managers across multiple Forest Service regions, national forests, universities, and nonprofit organizations. And we want to acknowledge our funding sources. Finally, here is our user support email address for your questions and comments on Firebird. We always welcome feedback from the users so that we can continue to adjust and improve the tool. Thank you.